So Project Zomboid isn't HumanitZ, and HumanitZ isn't Project Zomboid. And I'm kind of getting tired of hearing people compare them.
Wait, they're not the same game? I thought I'd been playing the same game when I was playing each one every time.
Damn it, Dimension, stick to the script. But folks, that's the jokes aside. We need to focus on what sets these game apart because apparently people think this is the same kind of game or one's a wannabe of the other, and it's not actually fair because they're both amazing games. Now, let's go ahead and look at Project Zomboid, and if we stick to the basic tropes, Project Zomboid has zombies, isometric camera, skills, and apocalyptic survival setting. Humanity has all of the same stuff, but then it's the devil in the details that make games stand apart. Because if you go just off of those tropes and remove only one, which is the camera, you could say all survival games that have come after Project Zomboid are wannabe Project Zomboids.
Yeah, we play so many games that just involve surviving and killing zombies that again, if you remove the camera, you could just compare them all and they could all be the same thing. You could lump DayZ in with all of this. Even though we know DayZ's completely different, you could throw that in here too if you just remove the camera.
Before we lose you folks, let's go ahead and compare the hard facts. The camera system, let's nail that down right away. Project Zomboid has an isometric camera, so does HumanitZ. But you know what Project Zomboid doesn't have? Which I love Project Zomboid, but it doesn't have the ability to tilt. It doesn't have the ability to rotate. HumanitZ, you can put your camera on center, which is above your character. You can put it close, which is just above the shoulder, above the head. You can even put it default, which is a bit further out, like an isometric camera. But the thing is you have full camera control. You can rotate all the way around your camera. You can zoom all the way out. You can tilt it so it looks like a top-down game. And you can tilt it so it looks almost like a third person from back in the 1990s. But like that is what sets it apart from Project Zomboid. And that's just the camera alone. To mention, what else do you think sets apart the two games here?
I think your playstyle completely changes based on which game you're playing. Depending on Project Zomboid, I feel like is more of a dangerous. It is the combat's different. You have to address the zombies or Zeke, depending on which games you're playing, differently in Project Zomboid than you do in HumanitZ because of not only the different types of zombies in HumanitZ, because Project Zomboid only has basic zombies. They're walking, they're shambling. Some of them might have, better clothing, they might have a helmet on, but HumanitZ has zombies that are sprinting at you, zombies that are jumping at you. Like you have to adjust your play styles in each game to fit both the zombies and the areas you're in as well.
Yeah, and that's a good point. But another thing that makes them clearly different than each other is the skill system that follows them. Project Zomboid has a beautiful skill system that's based upon the actions and relevant efforts to that action. You use long blunt, it's baseball bats, crowbars, etc. You're building a base, it's carpentry or welding, etc., right? In HumanitZ, right now, as it is, as you level up, you gain skill points. And those skill points can be invested in any type of, I would say, more traits and attributes than that. And yeah, while HumanitZ and Project Zomboid have like a profession system, Project Zomboid's profession system when you're building your character is far, far more advanced and far more detailed. Where HumanitZ just offers you some slight perks, but it isn't like giving you like the advantages that you would receive in Project Zomboid if you build like a strong fireman character.
That's the one thing I really love about Project Zomboid when you're creating your character is you have all those buffs, you have the professions, but you also have negatives you can add to your character. And some of those will affect your skills and those buffs that you might get from your profession. I like to go in there and hit random and let the game pick for me. And each time I do that, it changes the way I play that session. It changes the way I play that character because I have to play to their strengths and their weaknesses. You don't necessarily have that with HumanitZ. That doesn't mean that their profession system is less or worse or anything like that. But again, that goes back to what I was saying about the play style. That changes the way you have to play the game, one game to the other, because of how you're building your character and what skills you have.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen Gramps in in HumanitZ, but in Project Zomboid, Gramps is heck of fun.
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
an old, grouchy man who half the time when he dies, it's like the most hilarious way to die ever. But and that brings us to other important parts. the humanity is set in a post-apocalyptic world where Project Zomboid could be in the apocalypse, like 3 months later after the zombie outbreak happened, or it can be at the very start if you play default mode. But the reality of it is HumanitZ starts off with NPCs, and they've been there since the beginning of early access, by the way. So, like, you're in a world that still technically has people living in it and trying to survive. Where in Project Zomboid, it kind of feels like you're the only one. Now, I know Project Zomboid is eventually going to have NPCs, but we're looking at the differences right now, and humanity has NPCs, and that's how it has those differences.
That really fits the story of both games, though. Well, I shouldn't really say the story of HumanitZ because we don't have a lot of backstory on HumanitZ world just yet. But it all of that fits the story of Project Zomboid because when you start Project Zomboid, it tells you this is how you die. It's the story of how that character dies. You're meant to die eventually in some way in Project Zomboid. HumanitZ is not necessarily that you're just meant to survive forever because you're probably not going to, but it's not the story of how your character passes away or dies or anything like that. It's literally you surviving, you interacting with these NPCs, you making your way in the world. Whereas Project Zomboid, you're just telling a story of how this survivor dies, whether it's of old age if you make it long enough or it's taken out by a zombie bite.
Yeah, now I'm going to talk about the maps. You talk about the driving because I know you like the driving. But Project Zomboid and HumanitZ have very different maps. Project Zomboid map is huge, gigantic. Having a vehicle in Project Zomboid is almost necessary to do any kind of long range supply runs. Otherwise, you're spending days going between towns, and you don't know what's going to happen in between, and you don't know what's going to happen when you finally get to the town. Is there going to be a horde of zombies that you just can't beat, and you're going to have to slug back home and possibly die of starvation? But in HumanitZ, the map is small enough that while yes, it does take a while to get places, it's nowhere near as long as HumanitZ, Project Zomboid. But that's not bad. I messed up right there, folks. But that's not a bad thing. They all have their different, I guess, speeds on which you play the map. And HumanitZ, it's a bit quicker. Once you get a vehicle, the map becomes extremely small because it's so easy to zoom around the HumanitZ map. But on Project Zomboid, I don't care if you have the fastest car in the world, you're still going to have trouble getting places, mainly because of my driving skills. But still, like,
You bring up the maps. I love the way the maps look in each game too. Now, HumanitZ is a more basic, just like a grid pattern, and you discover, and it kind of opens up in front of you as you go. You know, it's white and gray, white and black. But Project Zomboid, when you open your map, it actually looks like you're opening a paper map and your character's reading a paper map, and it's meant to be that way. And it's very cool to me. But it makes it a little more difficult when you're driving. um, Driving is very different in both games. Car maintenance is very different in both games. HumanitZ, you need like 4 parts, I think, and some gas to get a car running, and you might need a repair kit to repair the vehicle itself. Project Zomboid is a little bit different. You got to put a lot more maintenance into this car. You got to find the keys to the car. You got to make sure that the car is not, it doesn't have flat tires, like so on and so forth. There's so much to be put in to a vehicle in Project Zomboid versus HumanitZ. But then you get down to just simply the driving. HumanitZ has a different camera system, and the way the camera is facing, you can adjust that so you can kind of see where you're going a little bit better. You can see in front of your vehicle a little better. Project Zomboid, you still have the same view that you have as if you're your character driving that vehicle. So if you got a road that's running diagonally across your screen when you're walking through as a character, if you drive that with a vehicle, you've got to try to keep that vehicle going diagonally across your screen because you can't rotate your camera. You can't turn your camera. It doesn't turn to face the direction of the car, and they both drive very differently as well. HumanitZ has a little more drift to the cars. Project Zomboid has the handling's a little bit better, but you can open your map in HumanitZ while you're driving, while you're still moving, and see where you're going if you're brave enough and think you won't run into anything. Can't really do that in Project Zomboid, so it's a little more tricky to navigate.
finally, I think we should discuss the base building because they both have base building, but they're both vastly different in how they approach it. In Project Zomboid, you need to have the specialized skills to be able to build certain parts and other things. In HumanitZ, they don't really care what kind of skill you have. There is one skill called Resourceful, which makes it so it takes less materials, but you don't have to have level 4 of this skill to build this wall, which in Project Zomboid's beautiful because it gives a reason to level up carpentry. Otherwise, you just build whatever wall you wanted, but they also have different bonuses because of the camera styles. In Project Zomboid, the isometric camera really locks your creativity of seeing what kind of cool things you can make for your base. Where in Human Z, you can rotate your camera, you can really get to those nooks and crannies, you can build unique structures. And with the ladders being introduced in the last update, you can make cool watchtowers and so much more. But the base buildings in both games, while both are good, they are completely separated in how they approached it.
One very important detail to remember on the base building between the two games is in HumanitZ, you can actually place down a blueprint of what you're building and kind of see where you're going to be putting it to see if it fits where you want it, and then add your materials to it once it's set down. In Project Zomboid, you don't get that ability. You kind of just have to gather the materials to build what you want to build and start building it and hope it's in the right place or hope you can move it once it's down. There's also the with the building is the crafting tables. Project Zomboid, we've recently gotten a lot more of that kind of stuff in Build 42 with the smithing and things like that. But HumanitZ's always had different crafting tables and different machinery that you can use in the base building process.
Yeah, and folks, remember, we're not necessarily trying to tell you that humanity is better than Project Zomboid or vice versa. We're just here to say, look at both of these games separately and see them for their own merits. Whether or not you end up playing Humanity or playing Project Zomboid, it doesn't really matter to us. We just wanted to sit here, point out the differences, and let you guys make your own decision on this. Now, I'm pretty sure we're going to get commenters in the description down below going, oh, Project Zomboid's better. And that's your philosophy, that's your opinion. But remember, folks, the video games can be their own identities and their own things while keeping the basic tropes of a survival game. Thank you very much for watching the State of Survival podcast. Join me in thanking Dimension 119 and Red Falcon for helping me run it. Ta ta for now.
See you in another dimension.